here.
Thanks for being here, Bob. I'd like to start off by asking you a bit about your background, where you grew up, what did your parents do? Was there an entrepreneurial influence in your family?
I grew up in a housing project in Manhattan called Stuyvesant Town, 10,000 families. And it's funny, my mom died about 2 years ago at 89, and we had a lot of those sort of, mother-son, end-of-life conversations. And I went out of my way to thank her for always making me just an unflappable optimist, there was never a sad day in my mother's life, even the day before she died. And that was probably the closest thing to a contribution to entrepreneurship. My parents were W-2 employees their whole lives. My father was in the public relations agency business, turned down 3 offers to leave his executive job and be a co-founder. So I got 3 kids, they're all gonna go to college. I, can't take any risk, period, end of story. My mom was a New York City school teacher. But somewhere, I think I was about 11 when I started my first business, which was shoveling snow for all of the little retail stores on 14th Street from First Avenue to Avenue D. It was quite a nice business, had a modest exit. I sold the shovels and crap to my brother when I went off to college. And they'll never forgive me. That's about as close as I would get to sort of entrepreneurial influence, but probably by the time I had graduated college, I started 6 or 7 different businesses, none of any particular merit, but they were, sort of short-term cash cow kinds of things.
So let's fast forward a bit to when you were 22. You had a lucrative job, paying unbelievable money, and you decided to leave that job and found your own company. Why did you do that?
Basically, I was a senior news editor at WINS, a 1010 Wins all news station in New York. It was a union job. It paid an obscene amount of money to a guy who barely got through college with no distinction other than all the businesses I started. And I said to myself, gee, how am I going to do this for the next 40 years? I'm sort of topped out at 22. And, I knew I wanted to do my own thing. To me, more important than why I did it is why you or anybody else shouldn't do it. I had no idea about investors, no idea about exits, multiples, valuations. I did it because I wanted to be the boss. I wanted to have something that was mine, that had my fingerprints all over it, and where I decided what happened, what didn't happen, and whatever. And in my travels all over the place, I see too many entrepreneurs today who say, well, I want to have a $50 million exit like so-and-so, or I want to be the next Mark Zuckerberg, or whatever. And I believe firmly that if you are doing this to get rich, it is the wrong reason, number one, and more important, it's not the motivation that is going to get you through the lots of really down, tough, miserable days. Because, gee, well, if I survive this month, maybe I'll be rich someday. And for me, my first business was basically a PR marketing promotion agency, which added this new thing I had been learning about as a journalist called marketing to my alleged core skill as a journalist. And so I was learning how companies work and how they promote and getting paid to do it. So the work was fun. The business did not go well the first couple of years, but I couldn't give up because my fingerprints were all over it and it had my name on it. And as one young entrepreneur I had at Columbia not long ago said, I just don't fail. I don't allow myself to consider failure. So, God, business is terrible and getting worse. I'll figure it out somehow. And so I did 6 more startups after that first one. The other 6, my wife tells me I did because it had already become clear in the early years of our marriage that I was never going to be in charge at home. So if I wanted to be in charge, I damn well better start another company, be the CEO, because then I could be in charge. So.
Okay, so I want to get more into the methodologies in the book. So I'll kind of skip through until the time where you met your co-author, Steve Blank, and kind of how did you meet him, and where did you meet him, and why did you decide to write the book together?
Okay, let's see. Steve Blank did 8 startups. His 8th startup was a CRM enterprise software tool company. In 1996, before the acronym CRM even existed, before Salesforce, before any of the zillions of constant contact, things like that, he called my 7th startup, which was a CRM consulting strategy company called Marketing 1-to-1 that we started in 1993, before there was an internet, before there was email, and before there were all the other things, before there was an acronym called CRM. And in a couple of quick years, we sort of put ourselves in the center of what is now known as the CRM, revolution. And we were sort of the go-to strategy guys. And he hired us basically to do customer discovery, to find the big companies that were willing to shell out $1 million to $3 million to buy his Epiphany CRM marketing campaign management software. So, like a good CEO, I went out and met with Steve twice, got the contract signed, and then I go back to my office and try to assign other people to go do the work, because that's what the CEO is supposed to do. And they'd go out there and they'd spend 2 days with Steve, and at the end of the second day I would get the call, "I thought you had really talented people. These people are morons. Get them out of my office. I never want to see them again." The third time that happened, I said, the hell with it. I go to the Valley every 2 or 3 weeks, because that's where half of our business was. I'll handle them. And so I worked very closely with Steve for 2 or 3 years, rolling out, launching, developing customers for Epiphany. And the best news was, we're a poor venture-backed startup. We don't have any money. Can we pay you in stock? Epiphany went public and rocketed to a market cap of $8 billion. So we were very happy to have been paid in stock, as was Steve. So after those couple of years of working together, we kind of became friends. We both left our respective companies in 2000, vacationed together, stuff like that. And Steve had already written one book. I'd be curious, anybody ever seen or read 4 Steps to the Epiphany? Oh, not bad, okay. It was sort of the original core of the IP of the entire lean startup movement. It outlined the principles and how you approach it, but it was very difficult to read. The graphics looked like they were designed by a high school graphic arts class, and it wasn't the best written book since Moby Dick. And so Steve had to do it. He felt he had to do another book that now explained the practice of how do you do it. And so, long story short, he took me out to dinner and said, we had this meeting with Wiley. I don't want to work with a real publisher. They have rules and deadlines, and they tell you what to do. I want to write it myself, but I can't do it alone. Be my partner, and let's write the book together. At that point, I had about 40 years of startup experience, journalism experience, and had written what you would think of as a business methodology book for the CRM space called the 1-to-1 Field Guide, which was a bestseller in 8 or 9 countries. So he knew I knew how to do it. And that was the easy part. The handshake was the easy part. The hard part was figuring out every single little tiny step in going from an idea to a business and figuring out the sequence. And in fact, I guess about 4 months into it, we kept hitting roadblocks because companies in the physical product space operate, market, and respond very differently than digital companies. And so for those of you who've seen the owner's manual, every chapter is sort of written twice. If you're a digital product or company, this is what you do next. If you are selling gravel, door to door for a construction company, think about it this way, where the product is less, obviously gravel is not very malleable or changeable as you go. And so Steve, who basically never sleeps, and Bob, who tries never to get off East Coast time, we would have these knockdown, drag out, I don't want to call them fights, debates, till 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Which comes first, the competitive analysis or the problem discovery? And well, what would happen if you did it this way? And it was 18 months of startup hours, startup pressure. For the first 6 or 8 months, I went to his magnificent palace on the Pacific Ocean in San Francisco for 3 or 4 18-hour days. And then we weren't moving fast enough, so I started going every other week until March of 2012. We've at 3:45 in the morning with $30,000 worth of press time reserved for 8 a.m. We changed the last comma, hit send, and avoided losing our $30,000 for the first print run. Steve didn't tell me when he was romancing me to join him that this was going to be his, with my help, magnum opus, and that he was anal retentive, perfectionist, paranoid that we would leave something out. Thus, 118,000 words, 170 charts and graphs, proofread 14 times, and I think we've gotten 2 emails in 300,000 copies about things that appear to some people to be mistakes. So I guess that's where the hyphen in anal retentive is particularly important, because you keep going till you get it dashing right,
Don't forget to mention the 500 mistakes that are in there, and you calculated them.
Right. At the heart of the whole methodology is that successful startups are not built on brilliant ideas. They're built on testing and finding what's wrong with your brilliant idea. And our sort of running joke is that between the covers of the Startup Owner's Manual are at least 500 stupid startup mistakes made personally by Steve Blank or Bob Dorf, or both of us. And they are much more pleasant to read about than they are to, and a lot less expensive to read about than they are to commit. I don't know what 500 into $25 is. Is that a nickel a mistake? It's a lot cheaper to read them than to do them.
So let's talk about, you've had 40 years of startup and company success. What you see as the key differences between a startup and a company?
Well, the key difference is, for the engineers in the room, think of a startup as a giant algorithm. I think my customers are going to look like this. They're going to buy a product with these features and that functionality. I'm going to build it this way, sell it here for this amount of money to this kind of customer who I'm going to attract this way, and they're going to pay me in 10 days, 30 days, or whatever, right? It's one gigantic string of hypotheses. And on its first day in existence, a startup has no answers to any of the questions that form that algorithm, right? Because on day one of its life, a startup has no customers, has no product, has no channel, has no sense of how it's going to market or what they're going to charge for it, and so forth. An existing company has last year's lost customers, gained customers, competitors, competitive movements, competitive pricing. How come they're in Walmart and we're in Kmart? How come, they have lots of history from which they can start their 2016 plan. A startup on day one of its life, say today, has no idea what its 2016 plan is going to look like. And so a established company operates in execute mode. We're going to take those two customers away from those guys, and we're going to reduce the price to get this new market, and we're going to start selling in Taiwan or Lithuania or whatever. And these are the components of next year's plan based on last year's experience. A startup's job on day one is to search for those data points, to sort of test and iterate its way to the answers to each of the questions posed by that algorithm. And it's a fundamental, it sort of seems obvious if you've read the Lean Startup or the Owner's Manual, or you're here because you've heard all about this lean stuff and you wanted to hear a little more about it. It seems implicitly obvious. But for 100 years, startups were built by a bunch of people sitting in a closed room writing a 50-page fairy tale called a business plan. We're going to have a product that does this. It's going to have these functions. Customers are going to love it. They're going to buy 62 of them the first week, 120 of them the second week. It's all bull. It's all made up. And at the back of this grand fairy tale are 5 spreadsheets, and almost to a one, on the 5th spreadsheet in column 13, the number on the top, that would be 13A, is a 9-figure number, right? Doesn't have to be a high 9-figure number. 13Z is an 8-figure number, usually $18 to $22 million. Why is that? Because that's the 5th year revenue and profit, and Series A investors have to invest in companies that in 5 years will go to $100 million in revenue and about 20% profit. How can you possibly know today what your second quarter revenue is going to be next year, or how many salespeople you're going to employ, or how many customers you're going to have? You make it up. Customer development says, don't make it up, figure it out, and figure it out before you spend all the money tooling the product or writing every line of code. And the whole customer development methodology is in parallel. Half the team, the hackers, are building the product, and they're building it using agile development or agile engineering so that it can react to what the other half of the team, the hustlers, are learning, getting feedback from customers, from marketing partners, from trade channels about, maybe it needs these features and not those features, or maybe the price needs to come down, or maybe it needs to be bigger or smaller or faster or slower. And once or twice a week, the hustlers and the hackers come together. Hey guys, stop building all that crap for math. Everybody has a calculator. It's this new device. We don't need to have internal calculations, but everybody wants data storage as part of the product. And so they throw out a few lines of code instead of a few 100,000 lines of code. And as the feedback continues, it gets driven into the product, and the product evolves and the marketing evolves, so that when the product is done and ready to launch, you know what advertising, marketing, customer acquisition techniques work. You know where to sell it, what to charge for it, how to position it, how to explain it, things like that. And that's about the shortest summary of 118,000 word book. Must be the ribs, Ricky. Did you put something special in those?
Look, you talk about kind of scrapping away that rigid business plan in opt for developing the business model, and you talk about kind of getting out of the building and customer validation. But can you explain how one does that? How one validates customers?
Well, the first step of the process, customer discovery, is fundamentally a three-step process. The sort of cornerstone theory is there is not a single fact in your office or conference room or your professor's office or my office or your investor's office. The facts are all between the ears of your customers. And so whether you're selling B2B or B2C, from day 2 of your business, you should be out, sort of pushing, promulgating as much feedback as you can in a very sort of structured way. So the first time you do that, entrepreneurs always skip this step. They hate this step. First time you get out of the building, you don't talk about your product or service at all, or your company, or you, or your background. The first time you go out, you're trying to gauge the severity of the problem your company is going into business to solve, or the urgency or frequency or cost of the need you're going into business to fill. And we sort of suggest that most B2B products are sold because they solve a problem. Many B2C products are sold because they fill a need. Okay? And so the first time you go out, you want to understand if anybody gives a crap about the problem you're going to spend the next 5 years of your life working 100 hours a week to try and solve by building a business solution to that problem. And the way you do it is you don't, like I had a team out 2 weeks ago asking parents, do you want your kids to read more, enjoy reading more, and do better in school? Any parent who says no to any of those questions should be taken out back and shot, right? So you have handed the customer the answer you want. The most flagrant example of this was a team at Columbia Business School that wanted to open a hookah bar. That's the one where you smoke hookah, not the other one. A hookah bar near the campus. So they went out and they surveyed 100 Columbia students, and 90 of them said nightlife around the campus is really boring. And 43 of them said they'd like to see a hookah bar of the smoking variety near the campus. And they said, guys, nice, ambitious survey, wrong question. You fed them the answer you wanted, right? Hookah bar, sure, that sounds like fun. You got a yes. That's what entrepreneurs want. Now go back. You already know nightlife sucks around the campus. Go back and say, what would you do to improve it if you had your choice of activities? And they got back dance club, place to play board games around a fireplace, craft brewery, and 1 out of 100 hookah bar votes, and down from 43, right? Because they fed the customer the answer. And so this so structuring your customer discovery in many ways is almost as important as doing it, because if you're just spoon feeding the answers you want, which entrepreneurs love to do, see my fabulous new product, this is so great, it's got 0 calories and 100 healthy ingredients in it. I want you to tell me it sounds great. I'm not coming on positively to get you to crap on my idea. So step 1, problem discovery. Step 2, now that you have a sense that you're solving, and also, how often do they have the problem? If they have it once a year, probably not enough to build a business. If it's not that painful or not that expensive, probably not enough to build a business. And what you're really doing is market analysis. Is there a market for the solution to this problem? Is my problem on people's top 10 list? Because if you're not on people's top 10 list, the odds of them giving you money are really, really low, right? Is it a problem, that wakes them up 2 o'clock in the morning, almost every night? Boy, that sounds like a great opportunity. Or is it once a year, the week before Christmas? Oh, damn, that Christmas tree needs to be replaced, or, whatever. So once you've found that problem, and very often this takes going back out 2 or 3 different times. Maybe it's a problem for left-handed women over 30 but not for anybody else. That's still a pretty huge market. Maybe it's a problem for college students, but not their professors or their neighbors. Still a huge addressable market. So sometimes you're pitching it wrong, sometimes you're pitching it to the wrong people, and sometimes you're just explaining the problem badly. So you often have to go 2 or 3 laps around the park till you have enough confidence that you really have nailed an important, expensive, painful problem. Once you've done that, the odds are pretty high that somebody figured this out ahead of you. So then you dive into competitive analysis by putting yourself in the customer's shoes. I am a customer looking for a product that does X. And you spend hopefully a day, maybe more than a day, maybe each of your team members spends a half a day Googling it, going to stores and looking for it, going to Amazon, eBay, seeing where, Etsy, is this available now in some flavor or form, and does anybody seem to be buying it? And can I maneuver the product I'm getting ready to launch, or the positioning of it, or the pricing or distribution of it, so that I stand out from that cluttered crowd? Because if I can't, again, second sort of chance at premature startup death. After you've done those 2, you probably have the beginning of an idea of what your product is or is gonna be. It's probably nowhere near built yet. Then you finally go out and say, let me show you a new solution to the healthy drink business, and start to get genuine reaction, not to the finished product, because you could still be 6 months or more away from the finished product, but to some manifestation, some rough prototype, what we lovingly call a minimum viable product. How can I show people what this product is as quickly as possible before I invest the time and money in the tooling and the coding or whatever it takes to build the ultimate product, and start to get real, honest feedback, not just to the problem, but to my solution as it competes with the others in the marketplace. And so again, entrepreneurs almost to a 1 love to skip that first problem discovery step. But why would you want to spend 5 years of your life solving a problem that nobody has? And it's an investment of a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and the potential for its ability to improve the chances of your startup success are just so dramatic that it's well worth the investment. If you're 3 months in business, it's worth a couple of days pause to just go back and make sure that you have explained the problem right, and that you've positioned your product and its value in the solution set properly enough to maximize your chances for success.
What are some of the deadly sins for startups? What kinds of assumptions are toxic to success?
Well, you said you wanted to finish in an hour, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think the number one problem, which probably accounts for at least a dozen of my sins in the book, is most entrepreneurs are able to do this crazy sort of unpredictable high-risk calling because they have incredible self-confidence, right? Oh, well, nobody's buying it. Well, that's a sales problem. I can fix that. That's a problem, Well, what about the fact that 38 people in a row told us the product sucked? It was nowhere near as good as the $9 Intuit solution for doing your taxes on your smartphone. Well, that's a problem, but we'll figure it out. And that self-confidence, on the one hand, is critically important for any of us to be crazy enough to do this. On the other hand, it puts blinders on the entrepreneur where they certainly don't want to hear the negative signals, and they don't often process them adequately or give them enough credibility. And so I think that's really number one. Number two is, in a way, the opposite end of this, and that is sort of race to the finish, right? Why would I spend talking to people about the problem? I could be coding tonight instead of out interviewing mothers of young children about whether they'd ever buy this software to manage their baby's health. The interviews aren't going to get me to the dollar faster, and so there's this sort of race to the finish that gets in the way of doing it right. I mean, most anybody in this room can get the first small handful of customers, right? Brute force, calling in favors, calling on friends, but that doesn't get you to the three magic startup words: repeatable, scalable, profitable, right? It's repeatable. I call on 10 people, 1.5 of them buy, and I can make money at that rate, right? If you get to that calculus, the first thing I tell you to do after you've done the 10 interviews is go do another 10 and make sure it wasn't that you were selling umbrellas in a downpour, or it was the day after the world's computers were hacked and you're selling security software. Is it repeatable? Because it's also got to be, if it works in New Haven, it's got to be repeatable in Stamford and in White Plains and in Chicago and Cleveland and on and on and on for it to become a business. And so rushing through that process often gets you feeling good faster because you have some revenue, right? You can go home at night and crow, I made 10 sales calls last week and I got 1 order. This week I made 10 sales so far and I got 2 orders. Okay, I'm doubling every week. This is really a great trend, right? And then it stops raining and all of a sudden you have a warehouse full of umbrellas. And I think the third one is driven by number 2, and that is that you get those early positive signals, and now you spend every dollar you can find, borrow, steal, beg, delay vendor payments, delay employee payments, because you are sure you got it right. And you look up 30 days from now, the bank balance is 0. The revenue is not as magical as it felt like it was going to be when you pushed that button. And now you get to experience the venture capitalist's favorite activity called a cram down, where all that equity you've been working so hard to preserve for yourself and your founding team gets destroyed in a down financing round because you didn't deliver what you promised to your investors. So that's also talked about quite a bit as premature scaling. Pushing the go like hell button before you're really sure that the engine will run for more than an hour or 2 and that you have more than a few gallons of gas and so forth.
Okay. I'll ask you one more question and then we'll open it up to the audience. For what reasons should a startup pivot, or as you like to say, divot?
Okay.
Dig your feet in and keep going.
Well, for those of you who aren't, a pivot is, we look at startups in the context of the business model canvas, a 9-box diagram that replaces the business plan with a single sheet of paper developed by a Swiss PhD, Alex Osterwalder, who actually developed it for big companies to think about disruptive innovation inside their companies. And we met Alex, I guess, summer of 12, fell in love with summer of 10, fell in love with the canvas and said, would you mind if we sort of bend it and corrupt it a little bit for startups? And so the 9 boxes are things like, what's your value proposition? Why should somebody give your company money for whatever it is you're going to build? Who's your customer segment? What channels are you going to use? How are you going to keep and grow your customers? Cost structure, revenue structure. A pivot is a fundamental change to one of those 9 boxes. So, I mean, the most frequent pivot is, well, nobody's buying this, so let's do the freemium model. That way we don't have to answer for revenue for the 60-day free trial period, and we'll kick the can down the road and say to, and if you look at all the .edu online educational startups, almost to a one, everything is free because they've been given so much venture capital money on these brilliant business plans, and they can't get people to pay for the online courses of varying quality and value. But if they give them away, they can send out a press release. 100,000 people took our course in coding. Yeah, what was the revenue from that? Well, yeah. So a pivot is a fundamental change like that. We're going to go from selling through online channels to only selling at our own website, and that is going to have impact on other boxes on the canvas. Like, we better triple our AdWords budget, and we better really have great social media people because we can't afford to sell it only with AdWords. So it's a fundamental shift in an element. And what's happened with pivots, because it's sort of, we knew it had become the word of the year in 2014 when it was immortalized in a New Yorker cartoon. A very elegant man and lady, very fancily dressed, sitting in a very fancy restaurant at a table for two. And she says, "Herbert, don't think of it as I'm leaving you. I'm just pivoting to another man." And so pivot is with us, startup folk, to stay. And the biggest problem with pivots now is it's such a popular startup word, it's become like a bragging right. Oh, we pivoted 6 times, which I kind of call a pirouette. You know, your head is spinning, right? You're making a fundamental change in your business. You're confusing every one of your employees, your investors, your customers, the prospects who looked at your website 2 weeks ago when it was blue, now it's green. You know, 2 weeks ago the product was $1,000, now it's $40 a month. And it's like you just have this sort of very public, nonstop identity crisis. And so they need to be done carefully and thoughtfully. And the divot is, you know, when you go to make a sort of a desperate pivot that you really haven't thought through or tested with customers, and you just dig the hole even deeper for yourself, and you know, 1 or 2 good divots and you're basically out of business. So.
Okay, I think we'll open it up to the audience now if you guys have any questions. Yes, Mark.
I say this as someone who actually sells online courses.
I'm sure they are the exception.
We charge for them. So myself and some other seasoned or older entrepreneurs I know kind of think that we're in a period where there's been a huge overemphasis on investment at the expense of product and customer development work. And that shows like Shark Tank that have kind of popularized the idea that one day Mark Cuban's going to come around and write you a check have been very damaging to the startup ecosystem. I kind of wanted your thoughts.
I think that the startup world is overwhelmed with too much crap. And that probably 1/3 of the people who call themselves entrepreneurs clutter up the job market, because lots of people can fake their way through a job interview and, you know, stay late the first 2 nights, and then, oh, God, it's 5:30, I have a dog at home, I forgot to mention that in the interview, he's gonna crap all over the rug if I don't go now, I'll see you in the morning. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is the sameness of the ideas. I mean, how many apps can you fit on your iPhone, right? There's what, I think 1.5 million apps on, you know, in the App Store, in iTunes, and of those, 92% of them are free apps because nobody could figure out how to get anybody to pay for them. And the last time I checked these numbers was 2014, but I think it was a 2013 number. Of the paid apps on the App Store in calendar 2013, 10 of them commanded half of all of the billions of dollars that went through the App Store. And of those half, two of them commanded half of that, and of that, one of them was Angry Birds. Okay? Right? 20, right, if I have my math right, 25% of, no, 12.5% of all the App Store revenue to one one game. And plus or minus 1 million entrepreneurs probably wasting their time if they were looking for an economic return rather than a byline on a smartphone app. There is no substitute for that. The greatest idea in the world, without that kind of drive and push, doesn't turn into a sustainable, successful business.